Marjorie Taylor Greene is continuing pushing her national divorce idea that she's been very excited about. We've talked about why it is such an incorrect and vile stance to hold, but we'll continue to talk about it as she continues to push it. Dangerous stuff here. So during a recent interview on Real America's Voice, she said this, and then we'll discuss.
So I simply propose that we need a national divorce where we can split into red states and blue states. And no, that doesn't mean a civil war. And that doesn't mean that you can't travel to different states and there would still be trade and commerce and so forth. But it's simply a divide because we're really sick and tired of fighting with each other. In blue states, well, you know what? If you have transition schools to change children's gender, that would be horrific, but that would happen in blue states. If they want to have Antifa burning down cities and they want to abolish the police in blue states, have at it. So I simply propose.
So, separate from how horrible of a thing to push for this is, it's also based on false characterizations of the stances of the other side. The two reasons I heard her cite there were transition schools, I guess meaning blue state parents are going to send their kids to schools that just transition all of them to a different gender. Yeah, sure. That's definitely what the left is pushing for. And then abolishing the police. There's like 2 people in the country who want to abolish the police. It's always this complete, I would say misunderstanding, but purposeful misunderstanding or miscommunication is more accurate of what the left stands for to justify horrible, horrible stances that she just wants to hold. She just wants to believe it's justified to no longer be in the same country, but sort of, because she's saying we still will have sort of a federal government, but it'll be different, and red states will be autonomous, and all these incoherent explanations. She just wants to believe that based on probably a more complex conversation about her values and her beliefs. But she's using complete, pulled out of thin air ideas of what the other side is to justify that. And it's pretty wild to watch. But I'll just quickly run through and then we have a second clip from this interview again. And I'm having a hard time even understanding what her proposal is because she said, no, it's not 2 separate countries. We would be one country. But if you move from red states to blue state or blue states to red states, you wouldn't be able to vote for 5 years. And there wouldn't be any really federal programs except for military. And so does the federal government govern them or not at all? And just one unified military? Honestly, very incoherent. Her explanation. But if you were to in some way split the country into 2, it would not work red states, blue states. Just think about, pick any state for the most part, except for some very, very completely rural states. But for the most part, every state has really blue areas and really red areas. And then overall, it'll tilt one way or another. So since I live in Texas, I'll use that as an example. Texas is a red state, but there are tons of Democratic voters and huge cities where Democratic voters are very prominent. And so are you saying now they have to no longer be a part of their country and they're a part of the red state version of their country, or what? Bizarre. And if you were to have a red state autonomous group of states that is still part of the United States, but sort of that would be disastrous because, as we know, poverty, education, crime, all these different things are disproportionately worse in red states. So putting together only those states would make it very tough to deal with all those problems without the extra subsidization that goes into the subsidizing from blue states to red states and the federal programs that are able to address some of those problems. But next clip here from this interview.
Well, Congresswoman, wouldn't that just be, I mean, that sounds to me a lot like federalism, where states are laboratories of democracy. That's where most of the power resides. So states could do their own thing. Red states can have what they want in their schools and otherwise. Blue states the same. Remove some of that power from the federal government and put it back in the states.
Yes, it is more like federalism, but it takes some bold actions in Washington that nobody in Washington wants to take, and that would be getting rid of our own power. We would be cutting big bureaucracies and agencies. The Department of Education would have to go because states would be in charge. What about the Department of Transportation that just taxes Americans and then turns around and gives money back to the states with a little surcharge? The Department of Transportation would have to go, and states could be in charge of their own transportation and their own highways. There's many other departments that we could cut and reduce their size, get rid of their bureaucracy, and send the unelected bureaucrats back to the private sector, where hopefully companies would definitely be hiring, and they always are, and they could get different jobs there. Amtrak would be something that the federal government wouldn't pay for, and it could be privatized. And then our rails would have to be made safe again, because we've all seen what happened in East Palestine. What a horrible disaster. But the main point of what I'm talking about is the real issue that, guess what? If you look at the pollings, Americans support it, and they support it on both sides of the aisle. I'm just the only one that's willing to talk about it in Washington at this time.
Did you hear that? I don't know how she doesn't just instantly crumble from embarrassment at what she's saying. She cited East Palestine as a reason that it would be good to get rid of all of these federal entities and privatize rail-related things. What? It's the lack of regulation that allows these things to happen. We need more regulation on the railroad industry. Privatizing things will make it to where Norfolk Southern has even more authority over their own decision making when it comes to their safety practices, which would cause more of these things to happen. And we can directly tie into so many different industries and draw a line between regulations and decreased events that are negative and are disastrous, like what we're seeing in East Palestine. So privatizing everything and getting rid of all these different programs that regulate different industries would be horrible. And also, so often, Republican politicians advocate for getting the government out of your life. And I've said before, it depends on what the government's doing in what part of your life, right? It's not always good to deregulate, and it's not always good to do more regulations. It depends on what we're talking about. You have to have a nuanced understanding of that. But so often, the actions that the Republican politicians would take would disproportionately hurt their voters. So let's just pick one example, okay? The USPS. So often we're hearing from conservatives, oh, it's so inefficient, it's so dumb, we should privatize the Postal Service completely, and we don't need to be wasting money on this, and the private companies can do it better, and blah, 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 blah. Okay. If that happened, it probably would be still not that much of an inconvenience for those who live in very highly populated areas to get their mailing needs fulfilled through private alternatives, because it's low cost for the private alternatives to be delivering between places with larger populations. But the reason USPS is so necessary, one of the reasons, is because it allows anyone in the entire country, no matter where you live, no matter how rural of an area, to get mail to you for not an outrageous cost. And so Republicans disproportionately have very rural voters that live in very rural areas. And if they did that, it would all of a sudden be so expensive for those voters to get mail to them, to get necessary medicine that's sent through the mail or whatever it might be. And it would hurt them disproportionately. It's not that hard to figure out and not that expensive between, cities and stuff. But to get mail way out into a rural area, that becomes very difficult. And that's why it's awesome that we have the USPS that makes that doable and is absolutely promising that for so many people who otherwise would either not get what they need or be charged so much more because it's more expensive to get out to rural areas. So it is really backwards. And the advocacy for politicians that so many individuals love is actually working directly against the interests of those same individuals, and truly drives me bonkers. If you like the show, if you watch, you listen, whatever you might do, and you want to show your support, the best way, well, there's lots of ways, but right now, what I'm asking is that you subscribe to the channel. Make sure you're subscribed. Some people, because they see the videos, they think they are, but just make sure that actually, boom, that subscribe button is clicked. That allows us to continue to grow and flourish and survive. Thank you.